Colde Bennett thought he'd left the battlefield behind, but fate had other plans. One quiet morning deep in the forests of Cedar Pass, his German shepherd, Echo, began barking wildly. Following her, Colde stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, engulfed in flames. What he found inside would change everything. A young police officer, beaten, tied to a chair, barely conscious. No ID, no backup, no answers. Why was he left to burn alive in the woods? And what secret was buried beneath the ashes? This isn't just a story of survival. It's about loyalty, courage, and a dog who led a broken soldier toward redemption. You won't forget what comes next. Before we begin, comment your country below. Let's see how far Echo's paw prints can reach. Montana. Late autumn. A still morning. Sky the color of cold ash. Pine needles damp with frost. The world held its breath, waiting for winter. Colde Bennett moved like a man who didn't care if the world noticed him. At 38, he looked older, not by years, but by weight. The kind that sat in the shoulders and eyes. He had a soldier's frame, lean, weathered, and quiet. His short dark hair was starting to gray at the temples, and a long, pale scar ran across his left forearm, a gift from Afghanistan, though he rarely spoke of it. Cole's home was a remote hunting cabin tucked between two ridges in western Montana, far from the noise, far from memory. He lived alone, save for one companion, Echo. Echo was a 9-year-old German shepherd, large, powerful, and noble in posture. His sable coat had silver streaks, his left ear permanently bent from an old injury, and a faint scar lined his rear leg, a wound from his days in a K-9 unit overseas. Despite retirement, Echo remained sharp, observant, loyal to the bone. This morning, they were tracking elk, or pretending to. Cole hadn't loaded a round in his rifle. The hunt was a ritual more than a purpose. Something to keep his boots moving. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Suddenly, Echo stopped. His nose lifted. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Cole froze, immediately alert. "What is it, boy?" Then he saw it, through the trees, a faint column of smoke twisting into the pale sky. They moved fast. The closer they came, the darker the smoke. Not campfire, not controlled. This was thick, bitter something was burning that shouldn't be. Then they saw it. A cabin, half hidden by overgrowth, flames already chewing through its roof. The fire snapped like bones breaking. Echo barked sharply twice, a signal they'd practiced. Someone was inside. Cole dropped his pack. No time to think. He ran. The front door was cracked open. Heat burst from within like breath from a furnace. Inside, through the flickering shadows, he caught a glimpse. A man, tied to a chair, blindfolded. Cole didn't hesitate. He wrapped his jacket around his face and charged in. Echo followed, skirting low and fast. The man was in uniform tan and forest green, a sheriff's deputy, late 20s, bleeding from his temple. The rope was tight. The flames were closer. "Hang on," Cole grunted, slicing through the bindings with his field knife. "We've got you!" The man moaned, coughing. Cole yanked the blindfold off. Smoke-reddened eyes blinked rapidly, struggling to focus. Cole slung the man's arm over his shoulder. Echo took position, guiding their retreat. Just as they crossed the threshold, the roof groaned and collapsed behind them in a scream of timber and ash. They stumbled into the open. Cole dropped to his knees, laying the man gently on the ground. He reached for a water canteen and pressed it to the stranger's lips. "You're all right. You're out." The man took a shaky breath, coughing hard. His voice was hoarse. "Deputy. Nate Holloway?" Cole nodded. "Colde Bennett. This is Echo. You're lucky we were nearby." Nate struggled to sit up, grimacing. "I was investigating a smuggling ring. They knew. Someone knew. I was lured here. It was a trap." Echo circled once, then laid beside Nate, panting hard but watching the tree line. Cole turned toward the smoldering remains of the cabin. It was gone. Whatever secrets it held, reduced to ash. He looked back at Nate. Can you walk? With help, Nate said. Then we go to my place, Cole said, standing. You can rest, and then we talk. The walk was slow. Cole supported Nate while Echo ranged ahead, alert for danger. Every so often the dog would stop, ears forward, then glance back to confirm the path was safe. By the time they reached Cole's cabin, the clouds had thickened and a whisper of snow brushed the air. Inside, Cole helped Nate to the small couch and started a fire. Echo laid beside the hearth, head resting on his paws. Cole opened a metal box from the shelf. Inside was a weathered journal, its pages faded but sacred. Names of fallen comrades, promises made. One line underlined in ink. I will spend the rest of my life saving someone in your name. He placed the journal beside Echo. The cabin filled with warmth. Nate sipped broth from a tin mug, his body slowly relaxing. Thank you, he said, voice soft. If you hadn't come, I wouldn't be here. Cole shook his head. You're not out yet. Someone left you to die. That doesn't end here. He glanced at Echo. The dog's eyes met his, calm but burning with the unspoken question they'd shared before. The frost had not yet lifted from the pine needles when Cole, Nate, and Echo returned to the scene. The forest wore a silence that felt almost respectful, as if mourning the violence that had visited it just hours earlier. Smoke still curled faintly from the blackened beams of the collapsed cabin, mixing with the mist that clung to the forest floor. Nate Holloway moved slower today, though young only 27. He was stiff from the smoke inhalation and bruises that marked his ribs. His hair, a tousled dark blonde, was still matted from the night before, and the cut above his brow had turned a deep purple. He didn't complain. He walked with purpose, his tan sheriff's jacket buttoned up tight, one hand resting instinctively near the empty holster on his belt. Cole, as always, said little. His breath came in visible clouds. He moved with a quiet confidence, boots crunching damp needles, his eyes constantly scanning. Echo trailed ahead, tail stiff, nose low to the ground. The dog had slept restlessly the night before, pacing near the cabin door until Cole finally agreed to return at dawn. Echo knew something was unfinished. The clearing where the cabin once stood was now a smear of charcoal and twisted iron. The foundation steamed faintly in places. Cole stepped carefully, crouching to examine a patch of scorched ground. Still warm, he murmured. Echo gave a sharp bark and veered toward the back of the rubble, nose twitching. He began to circle a section of earth where the ashes gave way to damp soil. Then he stopped, pawing urgently at the ground. Cole was at his side in seconds. What is it, boy? Echo dug twice more, then paused. Beneath the disturbed dirt, something glinted in the weak sunlight. Cole brushed it clean. A small, broken locket, one half missing, the other engraved faintly with the initials M.A. Nate knelt beside him. His eyes sharpened the moment he saw it. That's Maria's, he said, voice suddenly hollow. Cole looked over. You know her? Maria Alvarez, 14. Vanished 3 weeks ago walking home from school. Her case wasn't the only one, but this... He took the locket, fingers trembling. She always wore it. Her mother gave it to her before she died. Cole felt a heaviness settle over his chest. Then this place wasn't just a trap. It was a transfer point. Nate nodded slowly. A holding station. Temporary. Before they moved them. Echo paced in a circle, ears high. Then he barked again, more insistent. He stood near a cracked section of the foundation, where bricks had crumbled into damp earth. His paws scraped at something buried beneath a thin layer of moss and cinder. Cole joined him and began clearing debris by hand. After a moment he found a folded piece of paper, soggy but intact, wrapped in faded plastic. They spread it out carefully on a nearby log. It was a torn map. The ink faded but legible in parts. A thin red line traced a route through the back roads of Montana. One location was marked with a red X, a warehouse, according to the faded text beneath it. It lay just a few miles west of the river bend near Flat Ridge. Nate traced the path with his finger. This might be where they regroup after each transport. Cole's face was unreadable. "And you were never supposed to find it." Nate exhaled, anger simmering under the surface. "Someone in my department fed them intel. I followed a false tip straight into that fire." Cole didn't speak. He turned the map over, then carefully slid it into a sealed pouch in his bag. He pulled out a weathered journal, the same one he'd kept since the war, and made a note beneath yesterday's entry. Echo found a locket. M.A., possible missing girl. Nate confirms ID, found burned transfer cabin. Recovered map, Flat Ridge warehouse. The act of writing was more than documentation. It was a vow, a tether to the part of himself that had once believed in rescue. Behind them, the morning sun was beginning to burn off the mist. Echo sat near the tree line, eyes locked on the horizon. He hadn't stopped watching since they arrived. "Echo!" Cole called. "What else do you smell?" The German shepherd perked his ears, sniffed again, then moved toward the edge of a mud path that curved behind the wreckage. He barked twice and pawed at the ground. There deep tire tracks imprinted in the soft earth. Not recent, but clear enough to identify. Heavy truck tires, dual axles, the kind used for industrial transport. Cole crouched beside them. These tracks weren't from a pickup. We're talking at least a 5-ton hauler. "They moved them in bulk," Nate muttered. "Not one or two kids. Dozens." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Nate turned to Cole, face hardening. "I can't go back. Not yet. If someone sold me out, walking into the station is suicide." Cole didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Echo, who had returned to sit beside them, tail curled neatly, tongue lolling as he watched his humans plot vengeance. "Then we don't go back," Cole said. "We follow the map." Later that afternoon, back at the cabin, Cole built a small fire and pulled out a second mug for Nate. Echo rested on the rug, finally asleep, one paw twitching with a dream. Cole began sketching a duplicate of the map by hand using a ruler and pencil. "Just in case the original's lost," he explained, "or intercepted." Nate rubbed his temple. "You've done this before." Cole didn't look up. "Not like this, but I've tracked things that didn't want to be found." He added a final note to his journal. "Confirmed Flat Ridge lead. Echo remains key. Next step? Surveillance." Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the past whispered to Cole again, but this time he didn't turn away from it. The wind carried a bite as the pickup rumbled down the narrow service road, tires crunching gravel long forgotten by maps. Cole sat behind the wheel, one hand steady, the other brushing the edge of his worn journal resting on the console. Beside him, Nate adjusted his sheriff's cap, his face still pale but more resolute than the day before. Echo stood alert in the truck bed, ears twitching as the scent of pine gave way to the metallic tinge of rust and gasoline. They followed the path marked on the recovered map, a red X etched near a curved bend of abandoned railway tracks outside Flat Ridge. There, half hidden by overgrowth, stood an old timber warehouse, long and low, its roof sagging like the back of a tired animal. Boards were loose, paint peeled to bone, and the siding bore water stains from years of mountain rain. As they stepped out, Cole paused to scan the structure. "Looks dead," he muttered. "Dead things don't reek of diesel," Nate replied, sniffing the air. Echo sniffed too, his head cocked and then trotted toward the rear loading dock. The wood creaked under his paws. Inside, the air was thick gasoline, dust, and sweat. Light filtered through broken slats, catching on footprints in the dirt, too recent to be from years past. Coiled plastic restraints lay near a wall, beside a bucket still half full of water. A thermal blanket hung from a rusted nail. Everything about the space whispered temporary, use-efficient, and cruel. In the far corner, the red glow of a surveillance camera blinked quietly from beneath an overhead beam. Nate spotted it first. "We're not alone." Cole's fingers were already at his belt, drawing out a tiny repurposed body cam built from an old phone and salvaged lens. He'd soldered it together himself, back when he still believed in building things. He handed it to Nate. "This one's wireless, no signal tracing. Keep it on your vest, just in case." Nate nodded. "What if they're watching now?" Then let them see we're just dumb enough to walk in, Cole replied. Echo barked suddenly, short, sharp, and took off toward a stack of pallets near the northern wall. He stopped at what looked like a trap door, barely visible beneath a tarp. His paws scratched frantically at the corners. Cole rushed over and threw the cover aside. There was a steel handle, bolted flat into the floor. He pulled, joints groaning, until the hatch creaked open, revealing a steep wooden stairwell leading into the shadows below. The smell changed instantly, damp, mildew, and something human. They descended carefully. The lower chamber was a crude underground storage room, perhaps once a root cellar, but now it held more than food. In the dim light of a single swinging bulb, they saw them four figures huddled behind crates. Two women, one older with gray streaks in her tied-back hair, the other no older than 20, clutching a trembling boy and a girl. Their eyes were wide with panic until Echo stepped forward. The younger woman gasped. "He's not one of theirs." "It's okay," Nate said gently, kneeling. "You're safe now." The little girl, maybe 7, pale and rail-thin, looked up with hollow eyes and whispered, "They said tonight they'll come with the cold truck. More people." Cole's jaw tensed. "Did they say where it's going?" The older woman shook her head. "Just said we weren't the last. Said someone in a badge was covering their tracks." Her voice trembled, but held a quiet steel. "They kept us drugged. But I listened. One of them mentioned Marvin, said he handled the paperwork." Nate's eyes flashed. "Marvin Keller. Works intake at the county records office. Quiet. Drinks alone. Keeps to himself. Which makes him perfect for disappearing documents," Cole said. The older woman's name was Luciana Ramos, a seamstress from a border town in Texas, forced north under false promises of work. The younger one, Sophie, had fled domestic violence in Arkansas. The boy was Mateo, barely 6, and silent. The girl, Anya, had been taken from a refugee shelter. No one had noticed. As Cole helped the women up the steps, Nate swept the room with his flashlight. There were signs of more bedding rolls, syringes, and an empty cage in the far corner. Whatever operation this was, it had been large, organized, and invisible. Back in the daylight, the warehouse felt suddenly alive with echoes. Cole handed Nate a map and nodded toward the woods. "We'll need to split up. I'll get them to safety. You stay hidden. Watch for the truck." Nate agreed, pulling his hood low and double-checking the camera on his vest. "They're coming tonight. I'll be ready." Before leaving, Cole checked the rear door and found a fresh oil stain, thick and black, a sign of a large vehicle backing in recently. Echo sniffed it and sneezed once. Back in the pickup, the rescued group huddled beneath blankets. Luciana held Mateo as he finally closed his eyes, and Anya stared at Echo with something close to awe. Sophie sat silently until Cole offered her a bottle of water. "Why are you helping us?" she asked quietly. Cole didn't answer right away. Then he simply said, "Because someone once helped me." That night, the warehouse loomed under the stars, surrounded by shadows, and hidden in the trees, Nate waited with the steady breath of a man who had nothing left to lose except the truth. The stars above the warehouse were faint behind a veil of drifting clouds, and the woods behind the structure grew darker with every minute past midnight. Cole had just left with the rescued survivors, and now it was only Nate and Echo in the silence. The pine trees loomed like quiet sentinels, their branches swaying under the weight of the night. Nate adjusted his vest and whispered, "All right, boy, let's see what else they're hiding." Echo, though limping slightly from a scrape on his front paw, likely sustained while digging around the hatch earlier, remained alert. His fur, sable-streaked with silver, shimmered faintly in the moonlight as he tilted his head, ears pricking toward the thicket beyond the clearing. Then came a sharp, low growl. Nate crouched beside him, squinting into the dense brush. "You smell something?" Echo padded forward cautiously, sniffing. He stopped near a fallen log and barked once, then began scratching. Beneath layers of pine needles was a torn piece of shirt, stained with dried blood. The fabric was gray, coarse, cheap cotton, like prison wear. Embedded in the seam was a fragment of a chain-link tag, the kind used for tracking detainees. Nate held it up to the moonlight just as Echo stiffened again. A twig snapped. Before he could speak, a figure lunged from the trees, tackling Nate sideways. He hit the ground hard. Breath knocked from his lungs, his flashlight spinning. Echo growled and lunged toward the second figure emerging from behind a tree, intercepting him mid-charge. The two figures wore dark clothing, their faces covered by scarves and night goggles, trained, efficient, and silent. Nate wrestled his attacker, a wiry man with a jagged scar across his neck, who fought with desperate, rapid strikes. Nate managed to reverse the hold, slamming the man's face into the dirt and pinning his arm behind his back. Meanwhile, Echo had locked jaws with the second man, a heavy-set brute with thick boots and a broken nose. Echo's teeth sank into the man's forearm, and the brute shrieked, trying to shake him off. By the time Nate finished zip-tying his own attacker, he turned to see Echo still clamped onto the other. "Echo, release!" Nate commanded. The dog hesitated, growled, then obeyed, stepping back, chest heaving but eyes focused. Blood darkened the fur on his shoulder, where the brute had landed a sharp kick during the scuffle. Nate aimed his weapon at the two subdued men, who now lay groaning under pine needles and scattered leaves. "Names," Nate growled. The scarred man, coughing through dirt, muttered, "Doesn't matter. It's too late. The shipment's already moving." "Where?" Nate pressed his boot gently on the man's wrist until he winced. "Green Hollow. Refrigerated truck depot. South end of town. Sunrise," the man spat. Nate narrowed his eyes. That depot had long been under scrutiny, but the sheriff always waved it off. His mind flicked back to a memory. Sheriff Boyd, a broad-chested man in his late 50s, leathery skin, clipped gray hair, and a voice like gravel, always calm, too calm. There had been complaints before, a missing ledger, a dropped investigation, and now this. "You got a badge backing you?" Nate asked. The man just laughed bitterly. "You'll find out when it's too late." Nate tied both men to the base of a tree and made a quick radio call to Cole, who was already halfway to a temporary shelter with the rescued group. "Cole, found two runners near the woods. One gave up a location Green Hollow truck depot before dawn." "You good?" Cole asked. "Mostly. Echo took a hit, but he's standing. We've got a lead. I'm going to check it out." As Echo sat beside Nate, breathing heavy but watchful, Nate reached into his jacket and pulled out a small energy bar, breaking it in half and offering a piece. Echo took it gently. "Good boy," he murmured. Then Nate paused. He looked down at Echo, the glint of fire in those intelligent eyes, the unrelenting focus even through pain. And he thought of Cole. Cole, who had been walking through hell long before tonight. It wasn't the first time Nate had seen haunted eyes. Cole had shared only fragments of his past, but one night, over a dying campfire, he'd spoken of Syria, of a girl, Maria. She'd been caught in the chaos of a patrol raid gone wrong. Civilians weren't supposed to be there, but she'd run into the street for her brother. A sniper hadn't seen the difference. "She had a ribbon in her hair," Cole had said, voice low, "and I couldn't stop the bleeding." Maria was the name of the girl from the warehouse, Luciana's niece. The resemblance must have gutted him. Nate rose slowly, hand brushing Echo's head. "Let's finish what Cole started." As they trekked back to the clearing, Nate paused near the log where they'd found the shirt fragment. Something gleamed faintly in the dirt, a silver locket, snapped open. Inside was a tiny photo, blurry but visible. A baby, Hispanic features, soft curls, asleep in someone's arms. A date etched behind the cover. April 3rd, 2017. Nate pocketed it. Maybe Cole would recognize her. Maybe she was part of this too. They returned to the warehouse and secured the two attackers more tightly. Nate recorded short video evidence using his body cam. Injuries, confessions, and a map marked with the Green Hollow route drawn by one of the attackers in the dirt. He then leaned against the side of the truck and stared at the stars again, Echo lying at his feet. "I think we're in deeper than we thought, boy," he said. Echo thumped his tail softly once, then rested his head on Nate's boot. The night air was dense with fog as Nate parked his unmarked Jeep behind a row of dying pine trees bordering the freight yard. Frost crackled beneath their boots, the earth still hard from the late spring chill that clung to Cedar Pass. Echo, his ears pricked, moved ahead silently, nose brushing the ground as if sensing more than just the cold. Cole stepped out from the back seat, the creak of his knee brace barely audible. He had returned just before dusk, wordless but steady, as if the weight of his past no longer buckled him. In his hand, he held a torn photographed 3 men in desert fatigues, dust on their faces, laughter caught mid-motion. "One of them's driving tonight," he muttered earlier. "Name's Wyatt Lee. We served together in Kandahar. If he's involved, this goes deeper than I thought." They crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, watching the operation unfold. The freight yard was unusually quiet for the hour. 6 refrigerated trucks were parked in a neat row, engines idling low. Men in plain dark clothing moved between them, barking instructions in low tones. 2 floodlights cast stark white cones of light, illuminating the yard just enough to expose movement but not faces. Echo began pawing the dirt near one of the containers. "Easy, girl," Cole whispered. But Echo didn't stop. She clawed harder, digging into the damp earth until her paw snagged something soft and frayed. Nate leaned in, brushing the soil aside. It was a torn scrap of fabric, once white, now blood-stained and gray with grime. The word sanctuary was embroidered in pale blue thread. Cole's eyes narrowed. "That's a registered non-profit based near the border. They help refugees cross safely. Or at least that's what the papers say." Nate tucked the cloth into a plastic evidence bag. "If they're lending their name to this mess knowingly or not, we're staring at international involvement." They repositioned along the side of one truck, its trailer door ajar. From inside, they heard the soft murmur of voices and then a sharp, terrified cry of a child. Nate's jaw clenched. Cole signaled for silence and pulled a small recording device from his coat. "This old phone of mine still records. Battery barely holds, but it's enough." He clipped it to the front of Nate's jacket and whispered, "Get as close as you can without being seen. We need their faces." Nate crept toward the cab, Echo following on padded feet. Inside the trailer, rows of metal benches had been welded into place. Dozens of people sat huddled together, adults and children, their hands zip-tied, expressions vacant with exhaustion or fear. Among them was a little girl curled beside her mother, clutching a torn plush rabbit. Cole focused his gaze on a broad-shouldered man in the driver's seat of the next truck. The dim light glinted off his badge chain and military dog tags. Wyatt Lee, a man Cole had once dragged bleeding from a blown-out Humvee. Now, Wyatt stood with a clipboard in hand, checking off names. "Confirmed," Cole whispered bitterly. "That's him." Echo suddenly tensed, then darted to a nearby drainage grate just beneath one of the trailers. She began growling low, pawing the ground again. Nate joined her, shining his flashlight into the gap. A glimmer of white plastic, then rows of vacuum-sealed bricks appeared, crammed deep under the trailer. Cocaine, by the look of it. Carefully disguised, stored under the feet of captives. Before they could report, Nate reached for his radio and keyed it. "Unit 4, requesting immediate backup at—" The response was static. He tried again. Nothing. His expression twisted into something between frustration and fear. "It's jammed. They've blocked the signal." Cole's face hardened. "Or someone cut us off. Someone who knew we'd be here." They heard footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Cole yanked Nate back behind the container just as a man in a hoodie rounded the corner, phone to his ear. "Yeah, we're loading the last batch now. Dispatch says don't wait. Leave before dawn." Cole's eyes locked with Nate's. "We need more than video. We need access." Without hesitation, he moved toward Wyatt's abandoned duffel bag sitting by the wheel well. Slipping on leather gloves, he unzipped it carefully. Inside were spare clothes, a knife, and a small magnetic key card marked only with a barcode. Bingo. He stuffed the card into his vest pocket just as headlights flashed near the yard entrance. A pickup truck rolled in slow, carrying 2 more men, armed and likely the next round of drivers. "We're out of time," Nate said. Just then, Echo gave a short bark and froze, head tilted, ears high, her body lowered to the ground. Cole followed her gaze toward the far end of the yard. A man in police blues stood near the shadows of the fence, too far to see clearly, but familiar. His arms were crossed, head low, watching, not intervening. Nate's breath caught. "That's Sheriff Dwayne Carter." Cole exhaled sharply. "No backup, no call. He's the leak." The realization dropped on them like a blade. They were on their own, and they had to decide flee or go deeper. "We need full evidence," Cole said. "We tail them. One of these trucks is headed for the main drop point. With the card, I can access whatever hell they're hiding in that warehouse." "Then we follow from a distance," Nate agreed. "We'll track the route, get footage, and get those kids out." Echo nuzzled Cole's side, a soft reassurance amid the thickening cold. For a second, the noise faded, the weight of choices heavy in the stillness. As the trucks began to roll out one by one, engines rumbling like beasts waking from slumber, Nate, Cole, and Echo melted into the tree line, headlights carving shadows behind them. They had names now, faces, a card, and the truth on camera. But most of all, they had each other. The first flakes came silently, barely more than dust in the wind. But within an hour, Cedar Pass was drowning in white. The sky had turned the color of pewter, and visibility dropped to less than 30 feet. A blizzard was settling over the mountains, and with it came their narrow window. Cole stood at the ridgeline overlooking the freight route, scanning through binoculars fogged with snow. His breath steamed against his scarf, eyes hard with calculation. "Storm's our friend," he said quietly to Nate. "Low visibility gives us cover, but only one shot." Nate adjusted the straps on his pack and passed a canister to Cole, a compact emergency flare beacon wrapped in thermal shielding. "Plant these at the forked path. We'll create an alternate signal trail, lead them into the ditch off the utility road. It's old, unplowed, perfect for slowing them down." Echo, her sable coat already dusted in snow, nudged Cole's leg. Her ears were up, and her nose kept twitching north. She knew something. She always did. They descended through the forest in silence, marking trees with infrared chalk, visible only through military-grade lenses. Echo darted ahead, leading them along a narrow game trail that ran parallel to the road. Cole limped behind her, his left knee protesting every slope. "This what your last deployment felt like?" Nate asked, panting lightly from the climb. Cole didn't look back. "No. That one was hell. This is the last march, one way or another." They worked fast. Nate crawled up to the old access road and buried a GPS tracker beneath the edge of the frostbitten pavement. The flares were spaced carefully blinking emergency lights programmed to flash in sequence, mimicking a DHS evacuation route. From inside the cab of a semi, it would look real. The convoy rolled in sooner than expected. The first 2 trucks crawled over the bend, tires groaning against snow-packed asphalt. Cole gave the signal. They'd set the trap just in time. The lead truck veered toward the blinking lights and followed the false trail. The second did too. The third hesitated, but Echo, now crouched beside a snowbank, barked once. Not loud, just enough. A man from the third truck stepped out, glanced toward the sound, and nodded to follow the others. Within minutes, the first truck was axle-deep in frozen sludge. The driver revved, swore, pounded the wheel. Wyatt Lee, still behind the wheel, shouted into his radio. "Stuck! Front axle's buried back up now!" Cole crept forward, barely visible in the storm. He tossed a flashbang toward the rear tire and turned his head. The snow muted everything, just a dull thump of light and white. In that confusion, Nate and Echo moved. They sprinted to the back of the second truck, where terrified passengers huddled. Nate cut through the lock with bolt cutters, yanked the door open. "We're here to help," he whispered. "Stay low, move fast, go to the tree line, there's heat blankets and food." Dozens poured out. Women carrying children, elderly with bloodless lips, and teenagers with nothing but thin sweatshirts. Cole joined them, guiding people with quick hand signals, his voice low but firm. But then Echo growled, low, primal. She turned and bolted toward the last truck. Snow kicked up behind her as her body vanished into the white. "Echo!" Cole shouted and gave chase. Nate covered the fleeing group using the last two flares as cover. His fingers, nearly numb, dug out his burner phone. He typed fast coordinates, a single phrase. Human cargo. Immediate danger. Trust only you. He sent it to a number under the name. Agent Tara Miles, DHS. No one else. Cole, meanwhile, stumbled after Echo. She led him to a ditch behind the convoy's edge where a small trail of prints broke from the main path. There, buried under a tarp and snow, was a makeshift crate just big enough for one child. Inside was a boy, no older than 8. Curled in a fetal position, cheeks pale, lips blue, shirt soaked with fever sweat. Echo whined and pawed gently at the wooden edge. Cole dropped to his knees. "Hey, buddy, you're all right now. I got you." The boy stirred faintly, one eye opened. "Cold," he whispered. Cole wrapped his coat around the boy, lifted him gently, and turned back toward the ridge. He didn't notice the tears freezing on his own lashes. By the time they regrouped with Nate, the convoy's drivers had scattered into the trees, abandoning their vehicles when they realized the trap had sprung. Wyatt Lee had vanished. Gone before they could capture him. They got nearly 50 people out. Nate built a fire pit behind a snowbank, shielding it from the wind. Emergency blankets were passed out, food ration packs opened. Echo moved among the crowd, nuzzling children and standing guard like a sentinel made of fur and snow. Cole crouched beside the boy he had carried, gently feeding him sips of heated broth. "He was left behind," he said bitterly. "Sick kid. Slowed them down." "He's alive," Nate replied. "Because of Echo. Because of you." Cole didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the tree line. "Think she'll come?" Nate asked. "She has to." Because if Agent Tara Miles didn't respond, they had just started a war with no backup, in the middle of a blizzard, with a target on their backs and a list of enemies growing by the hour. Cole reached into his vest and touched the magnetic keycard. It hummed with cold metal against his skin. They weren't done yet. They'd just drawn the line. The storm had not yet settled when the black SUVs arrived at the edge of Green Hollow. Their headlights cut through the snow like blades. Each vehicle bore the Silver Eagle emblem of the Department of Homeland Security, and at the front of the convoy stood Agent Monica Reyes. Monica was in her early 40s, tall and striking with sharp cheekbones and a commanding presence. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a tight braid beneath her tactical hood. Years in federal operations had carved both poise and skepticism into her demeanor, but there was still warmth in her eyes, a flicker of empathy that set her apart from most field agents. She had once lost a partner to a betrayal not unlike this one, and since then, she trusted slowly and with caution. But Nate's encrypted message had stirred something buried, a reason to hope again. As the DHS team fanned out around the snow-covered outskirts of Green Hollow, a compound of low wooden buildings on the edge of Cedar Pass, Monica gave sharp, quiet orders into her headset. Thermal drones hovered above. Ground agents moved in sync, silent shadows against the white. Inside one of the buildings, Sheriff Clint Marshall paced with an edge of panic. He was a large man, broad in the shoulders with thinning gray hair slicked back under a brown Stetson. His uniform, once pressed and proud, now clung to him like a disguise. The facade had lasted for years, pretending to uphold justice while orchestrating cruelty behind closed doors. But tonight, something was different. No one had answered his last calls. The radios were silent. His network had gone dark. He grabbed a duffel bag from behind a false panel in his office wall and slung it over his shoulder. Beneath his desk, he kicked open a hatch that led to the storm cellar, his escape route. But as he stepped onto the first rung of the ladder, a low growl froze him in place. Echo emerged from the shadows like a spirit made of snow and vengeance. Her coat was still streaked from the storm, eyes locked on him with unwavering focus. Behind her, Cole appeared, his face cold as the wind outside. His rifle lowered, but his voice steady. "Don't," he said. Clint raised his hand slowly, the cowardice now plain in his trembling lip. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think," Cole replied. By the time the DHS agents reached them, Clint was cuffed and silent. Echo never took her eyes off him. In the hours that followed, Monica led the team through the buildings. Most were empty, but in a back room of the administration shed, Echo began scratching at the floor. Cole knelt beside her and pulled away an old rug. Beneath it, a hatch. Inside, a hidden chamber with metal shelves lined in rows. Hundreds of counterfeit passports. Dozens of thick files detailing shipment schedules, black market contacts, altered identities. Evidence spanning years. "This is it," Monica whispered, stunned. "This is the hub." Victims began pouring in from nearby cabins. Many sick, many silent with trauma, children holding tightly to one another. Medics and crisis counselors moved in quickly, setting up triage tents. They counted 127 rescued by morning. Nate stood with a thermal blanket draped over his shoulders, exhausted but smiling faintly. One of the younger kids had drawn a crude superhero on his cast and labeled it Agent Nate. Later that day, under the thinning clouds, a formal debrief was held in the cleared courtyard. Monica addressed the gathered federal team, local responders, and volunteers. "I've worked this field for nearly 2 decades," she began, her voice steady. "But never have I seen an operation sparked by such unlikely heroes. A man who thought he was too broken to serve again. A police officer who gave more than his badge. And a retired K-9 who never forgot her purpose." She turned to Echo, who stood beside Cole. "For exceptional service, courage under threat, and saving lives when others couldn't." She knelt slightly and pinned a medal to Echo's collar. "Service Animal of Valor." Echo didn't move, but her tail thumped once in the snow. Applause followed. Cole remained still, hands in his pockets. Monica stepped toward him and handed him a sealed envelope. He opened it quietly. Inside, a letter on DHS stationery. An offer to serve as a volunteer advisor for the department's Rural Operations Unit. No obligation, no uniform. Just a way to keep making a difference, if he chose. Cole folded it back into the envelope. "I'll think about it." "You've earned more than that," Monica said gently, "but I won't rush you." Nearby, Nate was surrounded by press and agents. One reporter from the Pine Bridge Ledger, a petite woman with round glasses and a parka far too large for her frame, was already calling him the quiet hero of Cedar Pass. He laughed and waved it off. In the distance, the snow finally stopped. Sunlight pierced through the clouds, casting soft golden hues across the compound. Cole walked to the edge of the clearing, where the boy they had rescued, Liam, was huddled with other children. He knelt and gave Liam a soft pat on the shoulder. "You're safe now." Liam looked up, then reached forward to pet Echo. "She found me," he said. "Yes," Cole murmured, smiling faintly. "She always finds what matters most." Spring unfurled over the hills of Cedar Pass like a gentle breath after a long-held silence. Snow had long since melted, revealing patches of wildflowers blooming along the gravel roads and the scent of pine and earth returning to the air. Where the compound once stood, where darkness had been buried deep into the floorboards, a new building now rose in quiet defiance of what had come before. The cabin was no longer a prison. Its exterior had been reinforced with warm cedar wood, stained in soft chestnut tones. Wide windows welcomed the sun. A carved wooden sign hung above the entrance, Echo House. Below the name, etched in brass, were the words, "A place for second chances." Inside, laughter filled the halls. The main room had been converted into a multi-purpose area lined with bunks on one side, reading nooks on the other. At the center, mismatched couches formed a circle where kids gathered after meals. Colorful drawings and handmade thank-you notes covered the walls. No one would have guessed this was once a place of pain. Cole sat at a low table, bandaging the arm of a boy who had scraped himself climbing a nearby hill. He had let his beard grow out slightly, and though the lines around his eyes had deepened, there was a looseness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He wore simple clothes, a soft blue Henley, and jeans, but his posture still hinted at the soldier beneath. "Hold still, buddy," he said, finishing the rap. "Now you're officially tougher than most grown-ups I know." The boy giggled and nodded before darting off. Cole stood slowly and stretched his back. In the far corner of the yard, Echo lay sprawled in a sunny patch near the vegetable garden. At 10 years old, her muzzle was graying, and one of her hind legs carried a limp on colder days, but her eyes still followed every movement with sharpness and warmth. She wore a new collar, embroidered with the word Valor in golden thread. A little girl approached her 7, maybe 8, with dark curls and a quiet, serious face. Her name was Maria. She had been rescued from the last convoy in Green Hollow, and though she barely spoke the first month, she had taken to Echo almost instantly. Today she clutched a small pendant, tarnished silver on a red string. "My mama gave this to me," she whispered. "I lost it in the snow that night, but I found it again last week, near the garden." She knelt beside Echo and gently tied the pendant around her collar. "You're our angel," she whispered. Echo licked her hand and rested her head in Maria's lap. Inside, a group gathered around Nate, who stood before a bulletin board labeled Echo House Events. Nate had taken the role of station chief for Green Hollow's newly restructured sheriff department, but he visited the cabin every week. He had traded in his tactical gear for plaid shirts and a sturdy leather jacket, but he still carried the badge pinned to his chest, a symbol not of power, but of responsibility. "All right," Nate said, tapping the board. "This Saturday is the first official Charter Day of Hope. We've got a potluck, games, and I'll be judging the kids' painting contest. No bribes accepted except cookies." Laughter rippled across the room. Behind him stood a woman named Sarah Garland, now the appointed director of Echo House. She was in her late 40s, tall and willowy with shoulder-length blonde hair tied in a practical bun. Her gentle voice masked an iron will. Years ago, she'd run a women's shelter in Texas before losing her own son in a custody battle that shattered her trust in systems. But here, in this rebuilt place, she had found new purpose. Sarah caught Cole's eye across the room and offered a soft nod. He returned it, grateful. Outside the cabin, just to the left of the porch, stood a statue carved from reclaimed oak. It was a lifelike image of Echo Ears alert, gaze lifted toward the horizon. At the base, the inscription read, "In loyalty, there is redemption. In silence, there is strength." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and cast long golden shadows, Cole stepped onto the porch with a book in his hand. It was freshly printed, its cover textured like leather though it was soft to the touch. The title read, "Ashes to Angels" by Cole Hartman. He hadn't planned to write it, but one evening, after a long talk with Nate, he started putting words on paper memories, regrets, moments that had shaped him. It wasn't a war memoir, it was a story of Echo, of the broken and the brave, of choosing to stay when everything told you to run. He flipped to the final page. A dedication to Echo, my compass in the dark. A soft bark drew his gaze. Echo was at the steps, tail wagging weakly, asking to come up. He bent down, helped her onto the porch, and the two of them sat together as stars blinked awake overhead. Children's voices echoed from inside playing, arguing over whose drawing was better, laughter spilling into the night. Cole smiled. This was home now. At the heart of this story lies a truth as old as time. Sometimes it is not the strongest soldier, nor the loudest voice, but a loyal heart and a quiet presence that changes everything. Echo, a scarred and aging German shepherd, did not speak, but her actions spoke volumes. She sniffed out darkness, stood between evil and the innocent, and led broken men back to purpose. Through her, Cole found healing. Through her, a lost town found redemption. Through her, a house once used for cruelty became a sanctuary of hope. We often overlook small miracles in our daily lives, A kind word, a helping hand, the loyalty of a pet, or the courage to act when no one else will. But as this story reminds us, God can use the least expected to carry out His greatest works. Echo wasn't just a dog. She was a messenger, a guardian, a miracle on 4 legs sent to guide a wounded world toward light. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Leave a comment below and tell us how faith, loyalty, or even a dog has changed your life. Type Amen if you believe God still sends angels, sometimes with paws and scars. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of love, redemption, and unexpected miracles. May the Lord bless you and those you love.